For decades, the name Charles Manson has been synonymous with evil, horrible crimes, and now lies. The time has come to tell the real stories, to expose the fabrications, and to set the record straight. This is the Redemption Podcast Show, and I'm its host, John Krotek. On this exclusive series of the Truth Files, Jason Freebird Freeman, grandson of the notorious cult leader, and myself will discuss facts and reveal truths never been told before. Jason has no doubt justice will prevail. The truth is on his side. So is redemption. Thank you for listening. I want everybody to know that I am super excited for this episode of the Redemption Podcast Show. We have a very instrumental and a very important guest and a good friend. He's a U.S. Marine and a former California State Prison Corcoran guard. His name is Mr. Richard Caruso. Now, Richard's the one that really got this party started between Jason and me. I met Richard several years ago while we were on a veterans healing retreat in Saskatchewan, Canada. Going to tell you straight up, if a guy's going to tell the truth, it's going to be Richard Caruso. After we met, he introduced me to Jason Freebird Freeman, who we all know is the grandson of perhaps the most notorious cult figure in American history, Charles Manson Sr. As I mentioned, Richard's a former Marine, and his specialty was policing them. And when he left the service, he was employed as a prison guard, like I mentioned, in the state of California prison system, and was assigned to Corcoran Prison, very near Bakersfield, California. There he guarded some of the most notorious criminals in American history. He was the one that was on Charles Manson's cell block and got to know Charles Manson Sr. very intimately. Richard's also the prison guard who turned California's prison system upside down. His brave and stick-to-itiveness nature confronted major corruption within the system. Richard's story was the subject of a Hollywood movie. He has appeared on numerous television shows to tell his story in interviews. And he's here today on the podcast, on the Redemption Podcast Show, to tell the truth about his relationship with Charles Manson Sr. and all the things that happened while he was a guard there at Corcoran. Richard, welcome to the show. Thrilled to death to finally see you, brother. I haven't seen you in about 3 years in person. And I think the last time we had lunch at the Rusty Pelican down in Florida. And Jason, you're the reason we're here too. So I welcome both you men to the show again for this episode.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite and the invitation from you and Jason. I'm motivated to do the show. And, I'm like you said, I've known you for about 7 years, John. And, you were gracious enough to give me an invitation to Canada to hang out with some amazing American veterans and Canadian veterans. And then you and I formed a special friendship. And then I met Jason about 3 years ago through social media. And when Jason, when I first reached out to Jason, obviously he gets a lot of people reaching out to him. And I sent him information and evidence that he vetted me and he verified who I was. And we've talked on the phone over the years. We text, message back and forth. And it's a whole different viewpoint meeting Jason, the grandson of Charles Manson, than dealing with Charles Manson himself. And, out of anyone here, I knew Charles Manson the most because I dealt with him on a daily basis. So at the time, Jason was just a small child, I believe. I started working at Corcoran in 1989, and we had right around 5,800 inmates. And at Corcoran, we have what's called the Security Housing Unit. And that's a special housing unit for maximum security inmates. I believe when Charlie was convicted of his crimes, he went to San Quentin to death row, and then it was overturned. The death penalty was overturned, and I believe he went to Folsom, and then from Folsom he did a brief stint in Vacaville for some medical reasons. Then I believe he went back to Folsom, then back to Vacaville, and then to Corcoran. I believe that is the time frame. I might be wrong, but when he got to Corcoran is when I met him,
Let's
and
Yeah, let's Richard, don't mean to cut you off, but let's back up here, man, because what I want what to give me a brief synopsis because your core value set is rock solid, and we've talked about that many times. Back up, I know you're a family guy. Tell us a little bit about your core value set and where that was fermented, and then we're going to get to the prison. But I want the listeners to know you as a person because you stand out, man, more than you think you do, and people need to know that.
I appreciate that, John. I mean, I was 18 years old and grew up in upstate New York, and I just wanted to be involved in law enforcement. And I joined the United States Marine Corps, and I went in the Marine Corps in 1982, and I was a military policeman in the United States Marine Corps for 4 years. From there, I went out from the Marine Corps, honorably discharged, wanting to get in law enforcement. I tested with the Department of Corrections in 1987 before I left California. I went back to New York to a small sheriff's department in upstate New York and worked there for 9 months. I come from a big Italian family in which honor and integrity is huge. And from there, I got the call to go out to California. And I was going to go out to California and start working in the California prison system. I was eager to do it. Correctional officers at the time were making big money. I never thought I'd work in prisons. I always thought I'd work on the street in law enforcement, but they were, the mentality back then was build more prisons, build more prisons, build more prisons. Let's pump all this money into the prison system. And California and New York State was leading that charge to build all these prisons. So I got out there, and my first prison I started at was Mule Creek State Prison outside Sacramento. And the population there was about 5,000. It was a level 3. And it just wasn't stimulating enough for me. I just came out of the Marine Corps, and I was all about taking names,
Right.
young, dumb, and full of you know what, and
Yeah.
dealing and catering to the inmates and the convicts at Mule Creek. I'll give you an example of that. I had a famous inmate at Mule Creek named Gregory Powell, and Gregory Powell was the one they made the movie The Onion Field Killer after, and him and his accomplice kidnapped 2 LA police officers, took them up into Bakersfield in an onion field. Those police officers surrendered their guns to Powell and his accomplice, and they killed the police officers in the process. And that, through training in law enforcement today, we're taught never surrender your weapon, even if the person on the other, the criminal that's committing the crime, has a gun to your partner's head, and he tells you to surrender the weapon, or we're going to kill your partner. Do not surrender your weapon. And that mentality is based off that crime with Gregory Powell. I believe the movie had James Woods in it, and it's called The Onion Field. And but I had Gregory Powell, and I was on the yard one day, and Gregory Powell came up to me, and he had a cat in his hands. And I mean, he's a cop killer, so I mean, he's not going to get any kind of sympathy to me. But sometimes these inmates that are high profile, they kind of get this celebrity image that they like to walk around with, and expect special treatment. Now, Gregory Powell was not in maximum security; he was in general population, so he had the wherewithal to be able to walk around. And so he brought this cat up to me, and he said, "Is there any way you could take this cat to the main gate? I'm going to have my wife pick it up, and I would like to have her taken home." I mean, I looked at him. He's a cop killer. I'm not going to do special favors for him. And I just told him no. And he went and told my sergeant that, I basically turned him down. And my sergeant asked me, come on, just take the cat up there to the main gate and give it to his wife. And I was like, this prison is not for me. And there were rumors of this maximum security supermax that was getting built down in the Central Valley called Corcoran at the time. Pelican Bay hadn't been built yet. So they were building this place called Corcoran, and they were going to put all the inmates from Folsom to Hatchapee and San Quentin from those adjustment centers. They were going to bring them down to Corcoran State Prison and house them. You have to understand, though, when those inmates, Black, white, Latino, were in San Quentin, Tehachapi, and Folsom, they were segregated when they went to the small yards the size of a handball court. So if me and you were cellmates and we went out to that small yard, we would go out with other white boys. There wouldn't be any blacks, wouldn't be other Mexicans. So when they built Corcoran, they brought all of us out of the adjustment centers. We've been wanting to get at the blacks and Hispanics for years, and they've been wanting to get at us. And they brought us down to Corcoran, and they housed the convicts, black, white, Mexican, black, white, Mexican. So every time you would run yards, those yards would be integrated. So in a shoe unit, you'd have A section, B section, and C section. Each section would have 20 cells. Most of those cells are double occupancy cells. So you'd have approximately 60 inmates in each section, right? So if we're going to run yard, I would say lights on for yard, lights on for yard. A section, lights on for yard. So you look down on the first tier and you see cell one's light come on, cell three's light come on, cell four, and then you see them like standing in front of the door, shadow boxing, and they're getting ready to go to the yard and do battle. And you're like, what's going on here?
Freaking recipe for disaster, man. That's a place.
It was UFC before UFC. It was gladiator fights, and so basically, I've had people say, well, couldn't they just not go to yard or refuse to go out? And it would be like if me and Jason were cellmates as white boys, and the blacks next door attacked me. Jason better go out there tomorrow and handle his business, or we're going to have to handle the business inside the cell. And that's just prison politics. I mean, even if you came off the main line, say to do a 6-month, shoot term, and you came into that environment saying, I'm not a gangbanger, I'm not racist, I don't want any part of this. You don't have a choice. You're either going to go out there and handle your business, or you're going to deal with me and the rest of the homeboys inside that cell block. So that's what was happening. And as that young officer, eager to get my hands dirty, I mean, I'm 6'4", 290 pounds. I was being used over and over and over for special use of force incidents like cell extractions. I was the shield man going in there, getting into those cells, taking out violent combatants, having to fist fight these inmates, bringing them out.
Man, it's crazy.
What's that, Jason?
That's crazy. I said that's just. I'm just visualizing that, 290-pound man just having to go in with murderers, rapists, killers, and even though they don't have anything, but like you've got to go in against some crazy people that aren't right in the head, and you got to do battle. That's just amazingly. It sounds traumatizing in a sense.
What's funny about that, Jason, is that is the public's perception, is that he's a big guy and he probably didn't have that many problems inside prison. But my answer to them is, number one, there's a lot bigger guys than me, as you know, Jason, and number two,
yes,
myself and other big guys, we have a pain tolerance. My biggest problem was that 110-pound inmate that was eating his own arm or cutting himself and had no pain tolerance, and we're shooting him through the food port with tasers, and he's laughing as the electricity's going through him and pulling the darts out, and then he's hiding behind the mattress, and we're shooting him through the food port with a 37 millimeter block gun with the blocks, and he's got feces smeared all over himself, all over the cell, with urine all over the cell floor, and I'm going to be the first one. I'm going to be the first one through that cell door to have to confront what we call as a 5150. You know, you and I are 50-50. We're balanced. This guy's 5150. So I'm going to be the first one to make contact with this inmate. And when we start fighting, you know, he has no pain tolerance. We'll break his wrist. He'll start laughing. That big guy in that cell, that big talker, you know, that's in there selling wolf tickets, you know, he's gonna have a pain tolerance, and he's gonna, you know, shit's gonna get real fast. And I'm gonna be the first one to make contact with him. I'll give you another scenario. I had this big Muslim inmate, this black guy. He was probably 6'6" and just stacked, but he never caused any problems. Always respectful. And if you ever dealt with Muslim inmates, they're usually very respectful, into the Quran, very peaceful. Well, one day I came into work, and him and I have always had a good rapport. And he's up on the second tier, and he's throwing toilet water out of his cell, and he's raising hell, and you know, he's yelling, and the other inmates are telling him, you know, kind of urging him to keep it going. So I go up there and I say, Jones, what's going on? He's like, fuck you, coming to get me, Caruso. And I'm like, Jones, what's going on? I knew it wasn't in his persona to act this way. And so that, you know, I said, Jones, we're gonna have to come in there and get you. He's like, come on in here, motherfucker. You know, and so the other inmates were egging him on to kind of don't back down. They wanted to see the extraction and the explosion between Big Jones, who's 6'6", and between us coming through that door, right? So now Jones can't back down. Back then, we didn't have pads for our elbows or for our knees. All I had was a helmet. I put a towel around my neck so I wouldn't get stabbed in the neck, and I put socks over my boots so I wouldn't slip on the urine when I ran in the cell. So I had socks on my boots, a towel around my neck, and my helmet and my shield. So I'm standing there at Jones's cell door, and the door is about to crack. The sergeant's about to open that door, and I got three guys behind me. One has handcuffs, one has leg irons, and one has a small baton. And there was no videotaping at the time. The bottom line is, once those cuffs, as long as those cuffs are off, it's anything goes. If you got to bite the guy's ear off, anything goes, right? When the cuffs go on and the guy's in restraints, then all bets are off. We get him down, we get him medical treatment, and we get him out and rehoused. So I'm looking at Jones through this cell door. Jones is looking at me. He's staring me down. He's frothing at the mouth. I'm 6'4", he's 6'6". He's outweighing me by 15 pounds. He makes me look small, John. And that door is about to crack. And we're going to have a meeting of Jesus in about a second. And when that door cracks, my butthole starts puckering, right? Because I go, here it comes. And I go to hit Jones, and Jones turns around quietly and leans over on his bed and puts his hands behind his back. And I'm like, what's going on here? And I cuff him up real gentle, and I start throwing stuff around his cell like we're fighting, so he would save face to the other inmates. They're yelling, thinking we're fighting in there. And so I grab Jones, and I yank him as we're coming out. I yank him up, and I'm carrying him out. Now I'm shaking him. You know, now he's in restraints, and I'm shaking him as we're going off the tier, and he's struggling now, calling me names. And, you know, so when I get him out of the sight of the other inmates into my office, I let him down, and I look at him, I go, what the fuck, right? He goes, Caruso, he goes, that Mexican up in the cell next to me has a shank. He wanted to tell on the Mexican to get that shank off the tier, so he created this ruckus to get down into my office to be able to tell me and snitch that there was a knife on the tier, a shank, a homemade inmate manufactured weapon. And he used that whole scene, and I saved him face. But
wow.
That's called the Jones ruse, you know. So you're in this it really is a different world. I mean, and you know, the way you describe it, I don't think the average person on the street has any idea of what it's really like in those prisons.
No. We had two white inmates from Pelican Bay, two white skinheads. And one was going to be transported down from Pelican Bay, which is by Oregon, down to Corcoran for court. And so the transportation team goes to get this inmate. Let's just call him Smith. And they say, Smith, what's your number? Smith says his number. Smith cuffs up. They take him out of the cell. They got his paperwork. They put him in a transportation vehicle. And I want to say it's like 7 or 8 hours or 12 hours down to Corcoran. And it might be more from Pelican Bay. So they get him down there to Corcoran. We have his paperwork. We say, what's your number? He's not telling us the right number. We realize that these knucklehead officers grabbed the wrong inmate, grabbed his cellie, right? So we house Smith up in the shoe in his cell. Smith starts going off, throwing feces, urine, everything, right? Acting. He tried stabbing us. He made a little spear, tried stabbing us through the cell door. So now we're going in. We're going to go get him. He's trying to hurt us. We're going to hurt him. And if they're going to try to hurt us, we're specifically going to hurt them to send a message not to do this again. So we go in, and I mean, the fight was on with this guy. I mean, it was blood all over the place. We beat him down, swelled up in his face. He was not stopped. He wouldn't stop fighting. And you got myself on top of him and 3 other officers, and we're beating him down. Finally, we get him in cuffs. John, we beat him so bad that we could not take him to the institutional hospital. We had to take him outside to the hospital outside in the city of Corcoran. So we have him now transporting out into the city of Corcoran. He's in the emergency room in the city of Corcoran getting treatment. And the doctor calls us. We're there with him, and he's handcuffed to the bed in the emergency room. The doctor calls us to look at the X-ray, and we're like, "What's going on?" And he has an X-ray of his jaw, and Smith had a handcuff key with attached to dental floss around his molar, secreted in his esophagus. That his whole plan was to come down to Corcoran, get under his Cellie's name, cause a ruckus, knowing that we're coming in there, try to hurt staff, knowing that we'd beat him worse to get to the outside hospital, and he was going to extract that handcuff key and uncuff himself and escape at the hospital. That was the mentality of this convict.
Wow.
And that's the kind of stuff that you would deal with on a daily basis. I mean, a lot of these convicts were genius. And I'll tell you about Charles Manson.
That's what they so what you're describing to me are guys that are sitting around hours and hours and hours of plotting and planning, almost like a mamba in a cage, looking for the feeder to come in at the right moment, and bam, they get you.
They were so intelligent that we had to cover our keys, because we had inmates that had a history of looking at your key every day, certain keys to open certain doors, and they would visually, slowly draw a stencil outline of that key and then make a mold and use it in a door. And it's been done in other prisons. So we have to wear like a sleeve over the key, because that's how intelligent they are.
Wow. Yeah. So okay. So you're there at Corcoran, you're going through this, you're the ram of the battering ram. You're coming in there, you've got all these guys that are like plotters and heinous, and some maybe not so bad, like Jones.
Shootings every day, John. Shootings every day.
Yeah, I mean, that's called a dangerous environment. That makes skydiving look like duck soup, right? So tell us about the first time you met Jason's grandfather. How did that go down?
What's weird is that I'm going to this new gym where I'm at, and my friend opened the gym up in the mall. And so the mall, people are walking by as we're working out, and I feel like uncomfortable as I'm working out and see strangers shopping and looking in as we're working out. And it takes me back to thinking of how, like, Charles Manson or these inmates would think. Like, when you hear about Charles Manson, immediately people want to go up and walk by himself, like kind of like he's a zoo animal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like they want to walk by and see Charlie, right? And so I visualize Charlie having to deal with this over the years so much as an attraction almost. You know what I mean? To where people are constantly walking by his cell, peeking in on him, kind of like he's a caged animal. And that's how I feel at this mall working out. But maximize that times 1,000, how he would feel. But
Yeah.
you know, I didn't have sympathy for his feelings. I didn't know his history at the time. You know, I was young, and to me, he was Charles Manson, the killer. And but what he does, and he's very good at it, is he finds a common ground with who he encounters or who he meets. And with me, he saw that I was Italian. He saw us from upstate New York, and he started calling me Paisan. And he would tell me that he used to hang out with my father back in the 40s as gangsters. And they used to run the streets together. And, you know, it just, he would always talk about my dad and the mafia. And, uh, and so I would play along with it. I remember like he knew I was a Marine too. And I would come into work and I would come in and I'd look up to the cell. And lots of times he'd be at his cell door. And when he saw me, he'd bend over and he created this comb, like, you know, the dunce comb, and put it on his head. And he'd stand at attention and he'd salute me like this. And I would salute him back. And then he would go like this and bow to me like this. So I mean, we had this special rapport. I mean, I didn't feel sorry for the man because you know, at that time sympathy wasn't part of my DNA dealing with these convicts. But seeing over the years and learning his story, I'm not trying to be sympathetic at all, but seeing how and that's when I met Jason. I talked to him initially about a kid that really didn't have a chance coming out into the world. You know, where do you think they're going to end up? You know, I mean, and he really didn't have a chance. And then when he went through the juvenile system, I mean, he was beat down, molested. Then he goes in the adult system. Now he's going to learn how to be a convict. So my interactions with him would be feeding him every day, passing out supplies, toilet paper, tooth powder. So I'm going by his cell constantly. But the best parts that I had with Charlie was when he would go to yard, and I would be the yard gun officer, and so he would go out there by himself in that handball courtyard and have to walk in circles. Well, I'm sitting 15 feet above him, so I have no one to talk to. He has no one to talk to. So lots of times we just had endless conversations. And you got to understand, I mean, before we go put him on the yard, I'm looking up every orifice of his butt, under his testicles, everything. And so, I mean, I'm his everything as far as his link to the outside world for his mail, for his food, for his hygiene, for his medical needs, for anything. I'm his life alert. And I'm every convict's life alert in that unit that's in my unit. So I got to know him on a personal basis very good. And like I said, he was smart. He's very intelligent. He would try to find a common ground with whoever he was talking to. If he knew you were in the army, John, he would create a story about the army or whatever, and try to form some kind of bond with you. As far as he wasn't, he would not come off to you hostile
Do you
initially.
think do you think that was his way? You know, you mentioned his upbringing and social skills probably weren't balanced in a way that that most people coming along would be. But do you think he was doing that because he didn't really have the social skills to try to find some common ground? Do you think he was actually planning something?
No, I don't think it was a plan behind his trying to communicate. I think that throughout the years in the system, and he learned how to read people. And whether it was a judge, a lawyer, an officer, someone trying to get something from him, I mean, he was always in fight or flight mentality because everybody that was involved with him was either beating him down, wanting something from him, or trying to manipulate him. So he's learning how it is to survive in a jungle, and that's what prison is a jungle, and you're amongst thieves and killers. And Charlie learned at an early age how to do that. And then when he got out, he went down to San Francisco, Haight and Ashbury, and saw some naive teenagers and kids. And started feeding them that Kool-Aid as far as what he had learned in the joint. And that was just convict mentality that he put on them. It wasn't a Charles Manson spell. He was just running game on these young kids. And but I remember one story. I remember one. If you know his history, you know that he tried to start a race war, saying that the whites were to come out back into the world, and the blacks would be in charge, and we would come up against the blacks, and so I would always play on that, right? I would always play on that. We start talking, and I remember one time I had a friend of mine that he was in the Marine Corps with me. We were military policemen. And Joe lived in Indianapolis, and he just retired. He did 30 years for the police department there. And I told him, I said, I got Manson in Corcoran. He's like, bullshit. I said, I'm telling you, I take care of Charles Manson. He goes, I want to come out and meet him. I'm like, come on out. So Joe flies out to my house, and Charlie's out on the yard with me one day. And I said, Charlie, I said, come out here tomorrow. Come out to the yard tomorrow. I'm going to bring my buddy by, and would you be okay to meet him? He called me Paisan. He goes, sure, Paisan, no problem, right? So you got to understand, when we meet Charlie, he's down on the yard. We're 15 feet above him, looking down from the window. So it's probably 110 degrees out there outside. I can't imagine what it is in the handball court. Charlie comes out at 1, thinking that I'm going to be there at 1 o'clock. I don't get there till 2:45, right? He's only got like 15 minutes left on the yard. So I come up to the yard, and Charlie's pissed. He's like, Jesus Christ, Paisan, I'm baking out here. Where the hell is your buddy? Right? He goes, where's your hell's your buddy? Right? So I go, he's right here. And I go, Joe, come here and meet Charles Manson. And Joe steps forward, and Charlie's eyes got big. He goes, you got me out here 3 hours to meet this black guy? He goes, God damn it. He goes, listen, boy. He goes, don't you know that you got that job in Indianapolis because of me? He goes, it was because of me and what I did. And he goes, and Joe is laughing. Joe's laughing so hard, and Charlie's just going at him, right? And I'm sitting in the background laughing. And Joe has told that story like 100 times. But
yeah. No.
Charlie is just, you got to understand, that was his world inside of institutions and prisons, inside a cell. And you got to make yourself do certain things to, whether it's reading the word. Charlie was a very talented artist. He would build these paper, like he would take paper, he would break up like trays of cardboard or whatever, and he would use carrots and others for food dye and make these like spiders and all these like little animals. And we had people that were taking them because they looked so good. He was very good at that.
Yeah, but let me say, so the world perception of Charles Manson, you saw him in a very intimate freaking way, right? But the world perception has always been that, and even some of the videos that we've seen of him in court and all that, he's sticking out his tongue, he's acting crazy, crazier. The world perception is he's just a freaking insane nutcase.
Right.
You saw him from a different place. Was he really that person?
I'm going to tell you this right now, and Jason probably doesn't even, I don't know if he'll agree with this, but Charlie, without the media attention and without the infamous crime, probably would have been back out on the streets, probably homeless, because he didn't, or in the music industry some way. He didn't have a support system on the street. So because of his crime, because of the media attention, he kind of parlayed into having a self-worth. You understand what I'm saying? Where he didn't have that before. Yeah. He didn't have that. He never had that self-worth. And Dennis Wilson and Doris Day's son, they were promising him a record contract and everything else. So he thought he was going to get into the music industry, but he never, as a kid coming up, think about it. And Jason knows what he came up in. He never had a self-worth. So all of a sudden now you're the most world's infamous criminal, and people are scared of you, and you're the boogeyman. And he knew how to put the boogeyman mask on, and that's what you would see.
So he created that freaking crazy persona.
And he knew when the camera was on, and he knew how to create that. But there was a part of the boogeyman. If you did, I had no fear of him. I mean, when I would escort him, he was so small. I mean, I would just tower over him, and I would hold him by the arm, and he would say, "Take these damn chains off, Paisan, and you'll see how strong I am," right? He always used my size, right? That he goes, "I'll show you," right? I go, "Relax, Charlie, relax. I'm taking you to the yard." I remember one day he was down in the yard playing handball. He's out there by himself, hitting the ball against the wall. And I'm at the yard door talking to him through the yard door. And he's like, and the gunner is above. So I'm talking to Charlie as he's hitting the handball. And all of a sudden the gunner says, "Rich, I'm going to pop the door." And no one's supposed to go out there when they're not in restraints. He would come to me, put his hands through the door. I'd restrain him in handcuffs, and then we would open that door, right? So he's out there, and all of a sudden you hear, and the door opens up. And he looks over and his eyes get big because he sees Caruso running out at him. And I go charging at him. And he goes, "Paisan, Paisan, Paisan," like this. I grab the handball and I start shooting it against, "Oh, come on, let's play some handball." And he starts laughing. He goes, "You can't be out here." I go, "Come on, I'll hit it with you," right? So I'm out there on the shoe yard with Manson, and he pissed his pants though, because he thought all those times that he said that to me that I was going to come out there and beat him down.
He was just waiting for that day. He knew it was coming.
It was coming. One day, on the bottom tier, we had high-profile inmates, 10 cells. 10 cells on top, we had HIV positive inmates. And that's when AZT just came out, the medication. HIV was still in its early stages. And Charlie's wants to go to yard. So they crack Charlie's door to come out to yard. Now he's supposed to have his flip-flops and his towel, and he would be in his boxers. That's it, right? They didn't have property. He's in maximum security. They don't have tape. They don't have anything in there, right? So he's coming down to the door straight to me. He's going to hand that stuff to me. I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to do an unclothed body search on him, right? He starts heading to me, and these two black inmates up in the corner cell yell at him and say, "Charlie, come on up here. I need you to have a word with you." And he turns to him, and these are HIV positive inmates up there, right? And he starts walking up the stairs. I go, "Charlie, get your ass down here." I go, "Do not go up there," right? And he goes, "No, I got this, Paisan. I got this." I go, "No, come back, come to the door. Now everyone's locked up. Now Charlie's loose out there in the day room area, going up the stairs to see what the two black inmates want, right? Excuse me. So he goes up there, and he goes, "Charlie, will you hand this magazine down to our homeboys on the first tier?" And Charlie goes, "Yeah, no problem." And he bends down to get the magazine, and they throw HIV piss and shit all over him, right? And now he's just doused with HIV piss and shit, and he's going crazy, calling them the N-word, banging on the cell door, wanting to get at these guys. And I'm yelling at him, "Get your ass down here," right? Now I got to put a hazmat suit on. And I got a hazmat suit on, and I cuff him up, and I'm got my gloves, and I got him in restraints, and I'm carrying him to the yard door, and I put him in the corner of the yard, and I get this big black hose, and I start hosing him up, hosing the shit off him, hosing off, and the whole time he's like, "I'm gonna get those bastards, Caruso. I'm gonna get those bastards."
Yeah, I mean that episode that's pretty crazy. That being said, with other prisoners, Charlie was isolated most of the time, it seems like. So what was his relationship with other prisoners? Were they always trying to get
everybody wanted to kind of go through him as far as feel him out. You know what I mean? Everyone wanted to say they had a relationship with him. I'm sure Jason has had convicts get a hold of him and say, I knew your grandfather.
Yeah.
I did time with your grandfather. They might have done time in a different part of the prison, but they might be trying to come at Jason for favor to say, well, I knew your grandfather. I did time for him. Brother, let me tell you, I got pictures of Charlie without the swastika signed to Caruso. We knew each other very well. Okay. We knew each other very well. And so, inmates it was a double-edged sword, John. The Mexican mafia tried to kill him. They threw some lighter fluid on him. I believe it was in Vacaville, and tried to set him on fire. So everyone either wanted to have the badge of killing Manson or befriending him. But to get back to those HIV inmates, I knew Charlie was going to do something. So about a month went by, and I come into work, and and I look up at the cell, the two black guys, and the Muslim chaplain is up there talking about the word through the cell door to the two black HIV positive Muslims. And as he comes back down the stairs, he's heading out towards me. All of a sudden, you hear, Father, Father. and the Muslim chaplain turns around and goes, what do you want, Mr. Manson? He goes, can you come here for a second? And he comes over to Charlie's door, and Charlie throws shit and piss all over the Muslim chaplain. And the black inmates up in the corner start going crazy. So that was his retaliation for what they did to him.
You mentioned people always coming at him. There's a court case going on now, and I'm not sure if you know the details, probably more than I do. But there's some people that have claimed that there's these wills or this will, and everybody wanted a connection to Charlie for whatever reason. Do you know anything about that? I mean, just from your experience,
we dealt with it constantly. We always had to screen the mail of all the convicts incoming and outgoing. And when you talk about Charles Manson, everybody wants to talk about him. But I had killers, some real killers in there. Juan Corona was one. I believe he killed like 28 or 29 immigrant workers. I mean, he had evil in his eyes. I've been eye to eye with evil. And Charlie, I mean, it was almost like dealing with someone that was just state raised. And when you're around that environment so much, you're able to recognize someone that can really run game and talks the talk. And but he basically was a caged animal. I mean, all those years, he couldn't be out in general population because someone would want to take him out just to have that mark that they took out Charles Manson. And so he had to basically learn how to entertain himself and be entertaining. And but like, I know I talked to Jason in the past of all these people contacting him saying, I know your grandfather. I knew, I did time with your grandfather. He was, well, you know what? How can you prove that? How can you, that has to be a struggle for you, Jason, to have to vet or to who to believe, who not to believe. And
it's been a struggle, Richard. It's been a struggle. When I first met you, the first thing I did was I did the research. Because anybody that has anything to do with my grandfather, they could say anything they want to. Anybody across the world can, but unless you could back it up with some legal proof or the proper documentation and not be something forged or rewritten or copied, or there's so many different ways to make money and get to notoriety based off of something that you made a copy of and you put your own name on there. So it's so easy for people to just show their true colors, but on the outside or on the inside really being fake, and then showing their true colors on the outside of just being manipulative and being liars. And I come across that often. So I got some not fan mail, but I got a letter from a lady a few days back, just sharing a little bit of knowing my grandfather. Well, for the most part, I had to rip that letter up and throw it away, and because it doesn't have anything to do with who I am. as a person.
Exactly.
You mentioned it, Richard, that you had to deal with it all the time. So there you go. That little bit of notoriety brings people out of the woodwork.
But John, you had like Guns N' Roses. You had people that used the Manson name. I mean, NWA used his name on Straight Outta Compton. I mean, people use Manson's name to make money. And for Jason to have to deal with that constantly of not being able to know who to trust, who's agenda driven, who's coming at me with genuine intentions. And I just wanted Jason, when we met, to know that I was the real deal and I had an intimate relationship as far as officer and convict with his grandfather. And I didn't have an agenda. And once I started knowing Jason, I'm like, this guy is a Christian. And he's on my Facebook. So I see him out there sweating in that heat, working his ass off to support his family, dealing with family issues. He's reaching out to me. I'm reaching out to him for advice. I'm not dealing with Charles Manson. And I realize we're talking about two separate entities here of Jason Freeman, Charles Manson. Charles Manson was who he was, but Jason Freeman is not Charles Manson. Jason Freeman is carrying the burden of what Charlie created and the perception of the public that is painted with a broad brush that gets on Jason. And that's why I did a post the other day to say, basically to my Facebook, that, you know what, me and Jason Freeman are friends and this is who he is. And if you got a problem with it, bye. Because I view Jason as I met this kid in the gym and he went to the ING Academy and he knew my affiliation with Manson and the movie Felon that was based on my true life story. And he goes, man, I met this kid, not kid, but young man came to my school at IMG with these other guys and talked to us about the Lord. I said, what's his name, Jason? He goes, Jason Freeman. I go, oh my God. I go, wow. I go, yeah. I go, I know Jason. He goes, no way. No way. And I go,
where were you guys at? Where did you meet at? What state was you in when you met this kid? I mean, because I might have been Florida.
No, we were in South Carolina. And he goes to LSU, and you're down in Florida. So here it is, you're talking 3 different states that you touched this kid's heart. And I even did a post about it. And Jason and the kid even talked through the post that Jason's handprint of the Lord was on this kid. And so that's what I start seeing. This is what Jason legacy, this is what he's doing. He's using his tools in his tool chest, like you see me do, John and Jason, throughout the United States. I use the tools that I have, whether it's a movie I made, whether it's working with notorious criminals, whether it's the Marine Corps, and I tap into that person that people think can't get tapped into. And I turn that frown upside down into a smile, and we shake hands, we talk. I leave them better off than when I met them. And
amen.
And I see Jason doing the same thing out there. So, similar minds gravitate towards each other. John, you do it too.
See, that's the way God works. And even like when you told me the story, you said, I need you to meet this guy. You knew we were doing podcasts, remember, from Straight Outta Combat. And then you said, so it took a while for Jason and me to come back around because there was so much going on. But you're right, Richard. When I finally had the chance to talk to Jason on a one-on-one, human-to-human, mano-a-mano conversation,
well, let me stop.
So much more than that.
But when I knew, for some reason, I called you and said, let's have lunch. You and I had lunch. I go, you're not going to believe who's a friend of mine. And you go, who? I go, Jason Freeman. You go, who's he? And because you've always been intrigued. You were always intrigued with my relationship with Manson.
Because you were showing me those pictures of the cave and all that.
Yeah. I said, this is Charles Manson's grandson. I said, John, I know the horrific childhood you had. And I know what you've been through. I said, I think that you and him would be a good team. And maybe you guys would kick it off. And to get to your credit, you took the initiative and reached out. And you and Jason have formed this amazing friendship. And
took us a while, though, didn't it, Jason? Took us a while because he was busy working. I was busy working. And what
Yeah.
you, Richard, one thing about our relationship and what I've always loved about you as a person is that you have a way, like Jason, to champion the little guy, the guys and the gals that are down and out. You have a way. You mentioned it about lifting people up and inspiring them and all
Raise
that.
them up.
And people talk about this, yada yada yada. But then there's some people that actually do it. And you always leave people feeling better than when you first met them. And that to me you talk about skill sets. That's probably the best human skill set that any human being can carry, is to be able to talk to somebody on a one-on-one basis, but make them feel better. I got to give you kudos, man. When we were in Canada, I saw the way you operated, man, and you were like always lifting people up. And I'm like, that's a guy, Richard Caruso is a guy you want in your foxhole. And I'm blessed to even be on this conversation and for us to have been friends the last several years. And then like what Jason and I have been working on with his Champion Soul and Decide to Fight program. That's how the universe works. And I couldn't listen, man, if the balloon goes up, you are two guys that I want in the foxhole with me, because I know you're not going to BS me, and I know I can trust you.
I have no.
John, I got a question for Richard.
Go for it.
I got a question for Richard. I just want to hear this story, Richard, and I want to make it known to the public, because I think it's a very important area of my grandfather's life, and when my father took his life when I was a freshman in high school. It was that following summer. But you shared a story with me that when my father passed away, that it really touched my grandfather, and I just want you to touch base on that, and please share with us one more time about that story that you ran into when you were speaking with my grandfather.
I was on the yard with Charlie, and he got notified that his son had killed himself, right? And at
What's
the
his
time,
son's name?
Charles Manson Jr.
Exactly.
Charles Manson.
Your dad, which we know.
I didn't know he had a family. I didn't care, right? I really just dismissed it and tried to, because I didn't know if Charlie was telling the truth, or was he trying to get sympathy from me to, find some kind of crack. So I just kind of dismissed it. But little did I know that 28 years later, that little boy of the Charles Manson Jr., Charles Manson's son that killed himself, there was a little boy. There was a family behind the window, that dark window that Charlie had created of his crimes. There's a family, there's people behind there that are paying the price, because they're carrying that burden out in the public every day. And 28 years later, this Jason Freeman comes into my life, and he's the child of the man that was being talked about on the yard in 1991 with his grandfather and me. So it was like God brought it full circle of you ignored it this time, when you had a chance to kind of have some kind of sympathetic approach. And now here is the son of the man that killed himself. And let's see how you deal with it now. Do you have sympathy for this young man? Do you have sympathy for Jason? And of course I do. I don't have sympathy for Charles Manson. I have sympathy for anyone that grows up the way he did. But the crimes that he committed, I have no sympathy. But Jason Freeman, I have a lot of sympathy for. And at the time, Jason didn't matter to me. I didn't know Jason. I didn't know Charlie's relatives. But for some reason, God has crossed me in the path of Charlie's relative, Charlie's next of kin. And I've had a chance to apologize to Jason for not being sympathetic to the pain that he dealt with, not just losing his father, but his father carrying the same burden, being Charles Manson's son, that Jason carries, being Charles Manson's grandson.
Really well put. That, and Jason, he had shared that story with me also. And put me in a
Yes.
great frame of mind. So that being said, Richard, encapsulated as a whole, what can we learn about the story of Charles Manson Sr. in totality? What is the story that we can learn here?
I think the story is a common theme that you see playing across America when you're dealing with young kids in a dysfunctional environment, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or whatever, and these kids don't have a positive male role model in the house, or mom's out there having kids by multiple men, or mom's working 3 jobs trying to hustle to pay the bills, and the kids have no security in the house, so they go onto the street in the neighborhood and they go up to the older kids. That's their security, is that gang that kind of they have to walk through every day to survive, to walk to school and back. That's the male figures that they're looking up to. That's their homeboys. And when you're raised on the street, you become a master of your own environment. And Charles Manson, being raised in the system, in the juvenile system, in the adult system, and being preyed upon constantly, he stopped being this person that would be approachable. He became a predator, and so anyone would become that, because you got to be able to survive. You're either a sheep or you're a wolf, and he might have been a sheep early in life, but then he learned how to be a wolf. He had to learn. He didn't have the physical stature to um, to impose on people, but he had the mental capacity to use manipulation or a common theme to get what he wanted, and he learned to master that. And people were like, "Did he have you under a spell?" No, no, no. I truly believe people, and I'm not going to say Charles, maybe even Charles Manson. You put him in a different environment growing up with a positive mother and father in that home, and
Come on.
in a chance to excel, and with encouragement and love, and I don't know if it ends this way. And so you have these kids all across America that are filling up our prisons because of that lack of male leadership in the home, conducting
Yes.
himself appropriately to the family, where the kids are looking at mom and dad as positive role models.
That's extremely introspective and so freaking relevant, Richard, because we're reading about the breakup of the families and how this scenario is actually pushed by certain individuals and groups. And we're not here to pass judgment. We're here to tell stories. We're here to connect. And I got to tell you, man, you said it yourself. You have come full circle. You get it. And you get it in a big way. And it's important for all of us to remember that person next to you might be the next great teacher, might be the next great dad or mother or law enforcement officer or next great Marine or whoever. It's important for us as humans to actually care about other people.
Care
also
about
might
people.
be the next person that's being abused or being taken advantage of, that is out there as a predator. And we have to look at how we treat our youth, and we have to set the example for these kids to to do better, and we have to lead by example. And I want to touch on this because we didn't talk about this, but at Corcoran State Prison, we had more violence at our prison and deaths than all the nation's prisons put together, and that's because they were mixing those yards up. And I was going to kill somebody at Corcoran State Prison. They expected me to get blood on my hands to keep my mouth shut. I went up my chain of command to stop these killings, and my chain of command told me to mind my business. So I started stealing stuff for the FBI and funneling it to the FBI to stop the violence at Corcoran State Prison. So that went on for 2.5 years, where I was funneling information out to the FBI, risking my life every day, going in there with a hit on my head to be killed. Those officers wanted me dead because they looked at me as a snitch and a turncoat, when in fact I wasn't snitching. I just couldn't take another life of a man that didn't have it coming just to get blood on my hands to keep my mouth shut. So the gangs, the Mexican mafia, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Guerrilla family, the gangs, the prison gangs inside the prison couldn't believe a cop stood up to stop this violence, and they put a protective shield around me and wouldn't let nothing happen to me. They enabled me to, so the people we think are the bad guys in the story ended up being the people that saved my life inside that institution. And then later in life, running into Mexican mafia members on the streets in Los Angeles, where if I was a bad cop that had done time that day, it would have been over with. They embraced me, they hugged me, they thanked me because they realized of all the lives, sons and daughters, or sons and fathers that were saved out of their community because I stopped myself and others stopped the shootings and killings. And so I wanted that to be said that once I realized I was so far over to the left of between us and them, there was so much of a barrier. They're inmates, they're convicts, they got nothing coming, to gravitate towards the middle of a gray area and realizing I don't see a lot of rich people in prison that have expert witnesses at their trials. Most of these inmates have public defenders. These public defenders are just meeting them for the first time as they're walking in the courtroom. A lot of these guys are taking plea deals because they got 2 strikes against them. So prison is a huge business, John. And at that time, I believe we had a lot of nonviolent drug offenders that were filling those prisons up. And I believe the state was directly involved with creating the violence for the public, had the realization of build more prisons, keep these violent people from crawling over the walls into our communities, and pay these officers as much as they want. So I think it was all intertwined. And I stepped away from it. I sacrificed my home, my family, and everything because I was going to kill somebody and get away with it and have to live with it. And fortunately, God watched over me. God watched over my family. I was able to make it with the support of good cops in the community, of good people in the community, embracing me, and basically in disbelief that this environment existed. I mean, I had to testify in front of the California Senate, ended up changing the whole Department of Corrections, the shooting policy, the hiring practices. So all those killings and shootings stopped as a result of shining a light on that system. And so now I just go around the country and I pay it forward to law enforcement and to our veterans and to my community. And I extend my hand to that underdog and I try to lift that underdog out. One thing that me and Jason, I think, share, and I see it in Jason all the time, we don't like bullies. We don't like bullies. And you know what? Jason's not a big guy, but he's not one to mess with. And so some of these guys I'd like to see jump off on Jason and they get their feelings hurt. So I don't like a bully. I don't like someone that preys upon people. And if I go down fighting, that's just what I'll have to do. But I stand up for the voiceless. And John, that's who I am.
That's kind of what you said before. That's what brings people together. The same energies kind of bring people together. And the story today is about your story, and what it really says to me, which is something that my dad instilled in me at a young age, is it speaks volumes of integrity. And a lot of times it takes that, what I say, true warrior to stand up to the systems that are in play. And it's easy. The path of least resistance is easy. And sometimes it takes real courage to step outside of that nonsense and stand up for what is right. Because regardless of what anybody says, I know Jason and you agree, and others like us, there is a right and there is a wrong. And when we're in the face of the right and wrong, we always have to go towards the right thing. And probably what's more important, and I know you, Richard, I know Jason fairly well, and you guys probably do the right thing even when nobody's watching. And for those that are listening to this interview, we're living in a better world because of guys like this. because
I
of guys like
appreciate
Richard
that.
Caruso.
I appreciate that, John.
And I believe that, though. You know me, man. That's what I
Well,
believe.
I get a lot of that from people knowing my story, but I'm also quick to tell them that I have cracks. I'm flawed, just like everybody else, and I have a lot of people that lift me up, just like you're doing, John.
Not claiming sainthood, Richard. You know that. Man.
No. But being a flawed man, being a cracked man makes me more genuine with what I try to do. And when I show you that I am not a perfect person, I've done great things. I have moments of goodness. I people on my Facebook, you could look at some of the comments and they're like, you're special, you're this. I'm like, no, I'm no better than you. You have the ability to extend your hand to a stranger and make them feel better than when you met them. And that's all that I do. It doesn't cost any money. It doesn't cost anything. I mean, John, you and I used to just go to lunch to shoot the shit about veterans and just for brotherhood. And that's just who I am. I'm not here to make a dollar, and my story is what it is. But God brings people across my path, and I think all of our paths, and we can maximize those relationships, or we can say hi and bye and not cultivate or maximize those relationships. So, fortunately, with you two, we've cultivated the friendship. We know each other, are the real deal. We're not going anywhere, and we're fortunate to have each other in each other's network. I'm thankful to be on this podcast today, and I know Jason gives me a thumbs up. It's not that I need a thumbs up from him, but I wanted him to know that I see him. I see him because he called me one time. First he texted me, and then he called me, and he's like, "I'd be interested. Would you mind if I stopped in, or would you?" And it shocked me. I'm like, of course I would meet. Of course you can stop in my home. Of course, right? But I think he felt because of his grandfather that burden. Once again he's dealing with that burden that I was painting him with the brush of you're this, and I'm like, no, Jason, I'm going to paint you with the brush based on what I observe, based on what I say, and I'm going to share something with you, John. I'm going to try to keep it the G-rated version. Jason and I were having a conversation one time, and I took him down an uncomfortable road, right? As far as talking about a pretty girl, right? He stopped me immediately. He cut it off. He said, "Nope, can't go there. Put me in check." And right then I realized this is a man of faith. This is a man that knows what temptation is. And you have to respect people's boundaries. And if I'm going to have a friendship with Jason Freeman, you got to respect his boundaries. And if you can't, then you're not going to be that person's friend. So I respect people's boundaries, and I respect him walking the walk, talking the talk he's talking, because he does walk the walk. And I see it, I respect it. And that's why I needed to tell my people who Jason Freeman was. And hey, I mean, people could look at Richard Caruso and say, well, you know what? He ratted on his friends, not knowing my story. I didn't have my hand in the cookie jar to rat on my friends. I went to stop the killings because I was going to kill someone, and I was 100% going to get away with it. So I didn't want to carry that burden of taking another human's life when I could at least try to stop it. I sacrificed everything to stop it.
Well, thank you for that, and I wanted to thank you for your time to get today.
I wanted to show you. I got so many letters, Jason, from Charlie. I got his blood. I got his blood on this letter.
You guys got to get together and read those.
Look at that. I don't know if you can
see. Yeah.
But
the SWAT skin there.
But anyway, I'm very fortunate to be invited on this podcast. I'm a big supporter of you and Jason and what you're doing. And I brought you two together. There's no doubt about that. But I truly believe that was God's work. And once again, you two could have been high. You two could have been high and by, and that's it. But you've cultivated a friendship and a trust. And I don't think there's any doubt in our three minds that who we are. And hopefully someone will hear our message and realize that, you know what, the voiceless need a voice. And some of those people out there that are victims of crimes and a victim of molestation or whatever at early ages, what do you expect them to turn out to be? And I'm not saying they're going to turn out to do what Charles Manson was involved in, but I guarantee you our prisons statistically are filled with them.
Yes,
Filled with
very,
them.
very true. Stuck in the court system, and it's a shame that we're not able to do more. When my grandfather passed away, about the year and a half after that point, I just dove right into prison ministry, and I'm in still good contact with a lot of the gentlemen that spent 15, 25 years, and they work in ministry now also, but they were caught up into some wrong things that they had to do their time for. But man, the turnaround and the change in these people's lives, and to sit back and watch these older gentlemen sow into the youth and sow into the communities after coming out of such a long bit behind bars is just amazing to watch God work.
Absolutely.
Jason,
Yeah.
I've had people come up and tug on my shirt years and years later, telling them I made a difference in their lives. I've had people say
Wow.
I saved their lives. I've had people walk across America based on being motivated, watching what I do and feed thousands. John knows.
I know some of that backstory on that too. And,
And
once again, Richard always stood up for the right thing.
and that being said, when you have a kid that's got a full ride at LSU come up to someone in South Carolina about some guy down in Florida that came in and talked to him about God, and now this guy is this Christian. Jason, that's the one. I mean, if we could touch one, so I bet you got 100 of those, Jason, that you made a difference in their life, and
Yeah.
that's what it's about. That's where you hold your
Good.
head high, and that's why I told that story that day about that kid, because I wanted you to show your kids, look at Dad is doing good. Dad is touching people, even though you don't think you are. You're touching people.
Absolutely. And that's what, that's a good point, Richard, because sometimes, like, for instance, we thank the people for listening to this podcast show, because somebody may be touched by this story that we may never meet, and we could influence somebody. And that's the way it worked, and I've said this to Richard before. Richard, you have no idea how many people's lives you've touched that you will never know just by hearing the story or by
You too,
lifting
John.
somebody
Same
up.
with you. Same with you.
It's what we do, and appreciate you. I've always appreciated you, and we've had deep talks too. And Jason, I appreciate. Wait till his Decide to Fight program hits the airwaves, because it's coming out soon. It's taken us a while to get there, but his Champion Soul Decide to Fight program, Richard, I'm telling you, man, you're part of that too, and we're not done yet. I just wanted to thank you for your time, and Jason too, and I appreciate you guys more than you'll know. And
I'm honored. I'm honored. I want to thank you, and I want to thank Jason. John, as veteran to veteran, I'm saluting to you. And Jason, all the way from Corcoran.
Semper Fi,
Praise
brother.
God.
Semper Fi, brother. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Redemption Podcast Show and this exclusive series of the Truth Files. Without your support, there is no show. Join us next time for more truth, more redemption. Everybody knows we can all use some.